Too. Sophie Cunningham suffered her ankle injury in that game, but in addition to that, she actually had part of her front tooth knocked out. She made contact with Jacy Sheldon as Caitlin Clark knocks down the triple.
The Indiana Fever entered the game on June 17, 2025, with a balanced 5-5 record, placing them in a middle-of-the-pack spot in the standings. Despite being considered the favorites on paper, the Fever were far from a dominant force in the league. They had shown glimpses of brilliance, but were still searching for consistency in their play. Coming off a much-needed victory over the New York Liberty, the Fever were hoping to build momentum and continue their push toward a playoff spot. However, with a 5-5 record, they knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, and every game would be crucial in their quest for postseason success. On the other hand, the Connecticut Sun had been struggling throughout the season, with a disappointing 2-8 record. This was a far cry from the team that had consistently been a playoff contender in previous years. Injuries and lackluster performances had left them at a disadvantage, and many had questioned whether they could turn their season around. Despite their poor record, the Suns' fiery play style and star power still made them a dangerous opponent. Players like Jonquel Jones, who could dominate the boards, and Dewana Bonner, known for her clutch shooting, had the potential to spark a game at any moment. The Sun might have been sitting at the bottom of the standings, but they still carried the capability to turn things around and could surprise anyone on any given night. Both teams entered this matchup with something to prove. The Fever, eager to maintain their recent win streak, were aiming to continue their upward climb in the standings, hoping this game would help solidify their playoff hopes. The Sun, conversely, were fighting to regain their form and had their eyes set on making a midseason resurgence. A win in this game could serve as the turning point they desperately needed to salvage their season and make a push for the postseason.
What really got this escalated, so that was called a flagrant. Those two were technicals. Charles got a technical, and then Mabrey for what we thought should have been.
Adding to the drama was the personal rivalry between two key players, Jacy Sheldon of the Fever and Caitlin Clark of the Sun. The tension between the two players was palpable as their rivalry stretched back to their college days, where they had been fierce competitors on the NCAA stage. Sheldon, a standout at Ohio State, had frequently gone head-to-head with Clark, who had starred at Iowa. Their on-court battles had often been full of intensity, with both players bringing out the best, and sometimes the worst, in each other. The animosity between Sheldon and Clark added another layer of intrigue to an already high-stakes game, making fans even more eager to see what would unfold. The atmosphere at Gainbridge Fieldhouse was electric as the game tipped off. The crowd was buzzing with excitement, fully aware of the intensity that both teams had brought to the floor. From the moment the game began, it was clear that both teams were not only playing for a win, but also for pride and respect.
The Fever came out aggressive, playing hard on both ends of the floor, while the Sun matched their intensity with their own physicality. The defensive battle was fierce, and the pace was high. The fans could feel the tension building in the air. This wasn't going to be just another game. From the opening whistle, it was clear this game would be anything but a smooth affair. The intensity was immediately noticeable as the Fever and Sun traded blows on both the scoreboard and physically, setting the tone for what would become an all-out battle. The first few minutes were characterized by a high level of aggression as both teams committed hard fouls, particularly in the paint, where the competition was fiercest. The Fever, led by the defensive prowess of Jacy Sheldon, and the Sun, with the powerful offensive presence of Caitlin Clark, were both committed to imposing their will on each other. The rivalry between Sheldon and Clark was immediately evident, and their personal stakes in the game were on full display. The two players were matched up against each other, each one guarding the other with a level of ferocity that made it clear this was more than just a typical game. Every dribble, every pass, every shot seemed to carry an underlying tension. Sheldon, known for her scrappy defensive style and relentless pursuit, was all over Clark, trying to disrupt her offensive flow.
But what people don't talk about enough is how hard you have to work to be able to be that good. All the hours that she's spent perfecting her craft.
Retreating, firing, and hitting!
So she can...
Clark, for her part, was determined to assert herself as the primary offensive weapon for the Sun, pushing past Sheldon's physicality at every opportunity. With just under 5 minutes left in the first quarter, the boiling tension finally spilled over into a confrontation. Sheldon fouled Clark on a fast break, a foul that on the surface seemed like a routine basketball play. However, the physicality of the foul seemed to trigger something deeper in both players. The two exchanged a few harsh words, with Sheldon clearly frustrated by Clark's aggressive offensive play. Clark, in turn, was not one to back down from a challenge and took offense to Sheldon's physical approach. What started as verbal jabs quickly escalated into a pushing and shoving match between the two. The referees, aware that things could quickly spiral out of control, stepped in to separate the players and assess the situation. After a brief review, both Sheldon and Clark were issued technical fouls. It was a clear sign that the referees were not about to let these tensions go unchecked. While the altercation itself was brief, it was a clear signal of the physical nature of the game and the emotional investment each player had in the outcome. The call for technical fouls also sent a message to the rest of the players. Any further escalation would be met with stricter penalties. Despite the brief pause in play, the physicality only seemed to intensify as the first half continued. With each passing minute, both teams became more focused on disrupting the opposing offense, using their defensive schemes to frustrate and rattle their opponents. The Fever were able to capitalize on their defensive intensity, leading at the half. But it was clear the game was far from over. The rivalry between Sheldon and Clark, along with the escalating tensions between the teams, made it obvious that this would be a game defined by emotion, intensity, and physicality. The third quarter began with the game still neck and neck, with both teams giving it their all, neither willing to give an inch. The intensity was rising, and every possession felt critical as the game remained tied up. Both teams had players stepping up, with the Fever's Jacy Sheldon and the Suns' Caitlin Clark continuing to dominate the floor. But then, an incident occurred that would take this already physical game to a new level, making it the most talked about moment of the night: Jacy Sheldon poking Caitlin Clark in the eye. It all began during a fast break sequence early in the third quarter. Clark was sprinting up the court with the ball in hand, looking to create an opportunity for the Sun. She had the lane open in front of her and was determined to push the ball and generate some momentum for her team. Sheldon, however, was right on her tail, using her scrappy defensive style to try and disrupt Clark's flow. As Clark approached the basket, Sheldon lunged in an attempt to strip the ball away from her, but in the process, her finger inadvertently made contact with Clark's face. The poke to Clark's eye was quick and unexpected, but the impact was severe enough to immediately stop Clark in her tracks, her hands clutching her face as she grimaced in pain.
All right. Here is Clark, splashing home a three from way downtown. Some words with...
For a brief moment, the entire arena fell silent, with fans watching in concern as Clark struggled to recover. Sheldon, likely realizing the unintended severity of the contact, immediately stopped in her tracks, looking over at Clark with a concerned expression. It was clear that the poke was unintentional, but the outcome was far from ideal. The officials halted the play to give Clark a moment to recover, and as she shook off the pain, it was apparent that the situation had escalated beyond just a regular play. Clark, visibly upset, took a few seconds to compose herself, but her frustration was clear. Clark, always composed yet fiercely competitive, wasn't one to let something like this slide. As soon as the game resumed, she made sure to retaliate, not in a physical way, but by making her presence felt. As they both moved down the court, Clark bumped into Sheldon, a clear message that she wasn't going to let the incident go unnoticed. It was a small act, but it was enough to ignite the tensions that had been building throughout the game. The physicality was escalating, and with every move it seemed like both teams were pushing each other to the limit. However, this time, it wasn't just Sheldon and Clark who would escalate things. Marina Mabrey of the Sun, noticing Clark's frustration and the physical challenge she was facing from Sheldon, rushed to her teammate's defense. Without hesitation, Mabrey stormed over and shoved Sheldon to the ground. The force of the push was enough to send Sheldon sprawling across the court, a clear sign that things had completely spiraled into chaos. What had started as a simple fast break attempt had now led to a full-blown confrontation between two of the league's most competitive teams. The referees quickly blew their whistles, trying to regain control of the game, but the damage was done. Players from both teams were fired up, and the atmosphere in the arena shifted from one of excitement to one of heated rivalry. The situation had become far more than a basketball game. It was a personal battle between two teams that weren't willing to back down. The rest of the third quarter became a war of wills, with both teams playing not just for the win, but for pride. The physical altercations, though unplanned, had become a defining characteristic of the game, setting the stage for what would be a fiery finish. The referees immediately called a stoppage in play to assess the situation, signaling to the players and fans that the altercation needed to be reviewed. The tension in the air was palpable as the officials took a moment to look over the footage of the incident. After a brief review, the referees decided to issue a flagrant 1 foul to Jacy Sheldon for the eye poke, deeming it an unintentional but dangerous act that warranted a penalty. While it was clear that the poke had not been intentional, the referees recognized that such an action could have serious consequences, and therefore, they imposed the appropriate penalty. Meanwhile, both Clark and Marina Mabrey were handed technical fouls for their roles in the escalating altercation. Clark for her retaliatory bump into Sheldon, and Mabrey for the shove that sent Sheldon to the ground. Both received the penalties that matched their actions. The emotional intensity and aggression in the game were now undeniable. Players from both teams were visibly on edge, with adrenaline running high as the repercussions of their actions became clear. While the fouls seemed justified given the circumstances, many fans and analysts were quick to voice their opinions that the referees had missed an opportunity to take more decisive action, especially in Mabrey's case. There was widespread criticism that Mabrey's shove on Clark should have warranted a more severe punishment, such as an ejection, but the officials chose to let her stay in the game, which drew mixed reactions.
As the game resumed, the mood on the court was noticeably more tense. Players, especially Sheldon, Clark, and Mabrey, were locked in with each other. Their focus intensified as they sought to take control of their respective teams. The physicality of the game had escalated beyond the point of no return, and the simmering emotions beneath the surface made it clear that more fireworks were likely to come as the game unfolded. As the fourth quarter began, the Fever held a commanding lead. Despite the aggressive nature of the game, Indiana seemed to have weathered the storm better than the Sun. But with less than a minute remaining in the game, another major confrontation unfolded, this time involving Sophie Cunningham of the Fever and Jacy Sheldon. Cunningham fouled Sheldon hard on a breakaway, sending Sheldon crashing to the floor. Sheldon, frustrated by the physicality of the game, quickly sprang to her feet, her temper flaring. She shoved Cunningham in retaliation, and the two players locked eyes, both showing no signs of backing down. This led to a shoving match between the two, and within seconds, the scene was chaotic. Referees once again had to step in, and after a brief review, they issued ejections to Cunningham and Sheldon for their involvement in the altercation. It wasn't just the players involved in this final fight that were punished. Connecticut's Lindsay Allen, who had been involved in some of the earlier scuffles, was also ejected from the game. The final ejections punctuated what had been a physical and intense battle. The Fever, undeterred by the chaos and the physical confrontations, were able to hold on to their lead, securing an 88-71 victory. Following the conclusion of the game, the fallout continued. Fever head coach Stephanie White addressed the media, expressing frustration with the way the game had been officiated. She felt that the referees allowed the physical play to get out of hand and didn't do enough to control the escalating tensions. White acknowledged the importance of maintaining a physical edge in games, but emphasized that it needed to be done within the boundaries of the rules. Meanwhile, Connecticut Sun head coach Rashid Meziane had a different take. He suggested that the Fever's aggressive playstyle was to blame for the altercations. He believed that Sheldon's aggressive defense on Clark had sparked much of the tension, and Mabrey's actions were a direct response to protect her teammate. Meziane called for more consistency from the officials, as the Sun were consistently on the receiving end of hard fouls throughout the game.
The players also voiced their opinions. Jacy Sheldon, still irate about the incident, said that she never intended to poke Clark in the eye, but was simply playing aggressive defense. She added that the physicality of the game had gotten out of hand, but it was part of what made the Fever so successful in pushing the game to the brink. Clark, for her part, stated that she would not tolerate such acts on the court, and that the rivalry between her and Sheldon was far from over. She called for greater respect for players on the court. adding that the game needed to focus on skill and strategy rather than pure aggression. The June 17 game between the Indiana Fever and the Connecticut Sun was a display of intense rivalry, physicality, and drama. While the Fever walked away with a comfortable victory, the multiple altercations that transpired throughout the game left a lasting impression on fans, analysts, and players alike. The incidents, particularly Jacy Sheldon's eye poke, Marina Mabrey's shove on Clark, and the final confrontation between Sophie Cunningham and Jacy Sheldon, showcase the high emotional stakes in women's professional basketball. As the season progresses, both teams will likely need to address how they handle aggression on the court and how referees control the physical nature of the game. What's clear is that this game wasn't just about the victory for Indiana. It was a testament to the fire and passion that the WNBA continues to bring to the table. However, as much as fans love to see competitive play, it's crucial for the league to find a balance between physicality and sportsmanship to protect the integrity of the game and ensure player safety.